Fighting on the front lines as a tank is a thankless job in any hero shooter. You're hardly the MVP, no one will thank you for soaking all that damage, and it's hardly a clean job. But someone's gotta do it, and that someone is you. My name is Kodiak, this is Legacy Gaming, and here's how you can master the Vanguard heroes in Marvel Rivals. From the moment Marvel Rivals dropped, I found myself playing Vanguard heroes. Somewhat out of necessity thanks to all the randoms that refuse to play anything but DPS, but really because I enjoy the challenge of being on the front lines and doing what I can to help take the pressure off of my team. Vanguards are tanks, that's true, but they each bring something unique to a match, and after spending hours with each of them, I wanted to help you master what they bring to the table. So, for each hero, we'll discuss their playstyle, what they excel at, any weaknesses, and how you can make an impact when playing that character. When you think of Vanguards, you think of none other than Hulk, a monster that can put enormous pressure on an opposing team with a variety of moves that can sustain him on the battlefield and a unique transformation that gives him a second chance at life. Hulk's strength comes in his dominating presence and his massive fists, which he uses to punch enemies into oblivion, distracting them from the real threats, the rest of the team. He's got a large health pool and an on-demand shield that make him even tankier. Talk about a character that's just hard to kill, you give Hulk a pocket healer and he's going to outlast his entire team. It's just pure carnage, and when you add to it his radioactive lockdown ability, which is a ranged attack that temporarily stuns an enemy, it's almost impossible to escape the Hulk's overwhelming presence. For all his strengths, the Hulk does have a few weaknesses. As I said, your goal is to distract the enemy team, and if you fail to do that, your damage doesn't make up for the fact that your allies are exposed. Ironically, Hulk's biggest weakness is that he doesn't do enough damage, but he really shouldn't as a defensive Vanguard. He is so incredibly tough that something had to give, and more skilled players will simply look to avoid Hulk while focusing on other targets. While he does have good mobility with his incredible leap, it's not instant, and those brief moments charging up a leap can give the enemy team an opportunity to quickly kill you. Also a negative, when Hulk is defeated, you turn into Bruce Banner, and while you do get a second chance at life, you have to build back up your energy, which takes a little bit of time. Bruce is incredibly underpowered, even for really accurate players, and that means a team fight is often tilted in the favor of an enemy team. So to play Hulk effectively, you need to keep in mind a few things. First, pressure is the name of the game. You should be up in an enemy's face at all times, trying to persuade them to attack you. Second, when you have that attention, pop your shield and soak in that ult charge, which can quickly fill up if you're taking enough focus damage. Finally, realize that while you're tankier, you're not truly unkillable, and your incredible leap is a great way to get you both into and away from a fight. You can be a bully, but recognize when it's time to back off for a quick heal. Currently one of the most overpowered Vanguards in all of Marvel Rivals, I am having an absolute blast playing Venom, a pure menace in the front line that can disrupt the team, clean up kills, and survive an onslaught of attacks. Some might say he's overpowered. I just think he's misunderstood. Venom truly brings so much to a team, but first and foremost, it's his ability to dive into and out of combat with relative ease thanks to his Venom Swing and Frenzied Arrival abilities. This is the ideal combo that you should almost always be using, as it will catch the enemy by surprise 9 times out of 10. Outside of Spider-Man, it's one of the fastest engagement combinations in the game, and that means something because it's much harder to react to. Most times you can barrel into a team and get off a few hits before anyone even realizes you're there, and those few seconds can be huge. To make this even more frustrating for enemy teams is your Symbiotic Resilience ability, which generates a shield based on how much HP you have missing. The more health you've lost, the bigger your shield, and if you time it right, this equates to a full second health bar. Add into the mix a competent healer on your team, and it's lights out, and Venom becomes one of the most challenging Vanguards to kill in a game. What I personally think is Venom's ace up his sleeve is his Cellular Corrosion ability, which I have used countless times to slow enemies that have tried to run away from me. It's the ultimate trap mechanic, slowing enemies to a crawl, dealing damage, and giving your team a target so they can land that quick kill. Put it all together and Venom is an absolute terror to deal with. So does Venom have any real weaknesses? Not really, unless you're going up against some really skilled players that can stun or sleep you. If there was another argument to be made, it's that he can't really do much in the mid-distance. If an enemy manages to keep you at range, there's very little Venom can do to deal with that, other than reset and wait for Venom Swing to come back off cooldown. The kicker is the ability is already on a short 8-second cooldown, so it's not like you have to wait long. There's also the chance that you overcommit, and while Venom is strong, he is not invulnerable. I've already seen less skilled Venom players just dive into an enemy team 5v1 and get obliterated because they think they're immune to damage. That's just not the case. You can be bold with Venom, just don't be stupid. So to play Venom effectively, you need to keep in mind a few things. First and foremost, your main job is disruption, and to fully embrace that playstyle, you need to master the art of Venom Swing and Frenzied Arrival. Be smart about when you engage the enemy and make sure your team has your back, because while you're tanky, you're not unkillable. Second, utilize your cellular corrosion ability to slow enemies as they try and escape. It's a unique ability with an effect most other heroes don't have, and you can use it to make easy targets of difficult to deal with heroes, specifically healers. Finally, you're an offensive first Vanguard that needs to crash the backlines to be effective, but don't ever stick in one place for too long. Use your Venom Swing to reset your positioning whenever possible, breaking the line of sight of enemy players long enough so that they forget about you, just long enough for you to drop back in and kill them. One of my favorite Vanguards to play is Captain America, and this was a genuine surprise because on paper his moveset just doesn't seem as fun as some of the other heroes in the game. Captain America is an all-around good Vanguard that can apply pressure on enemy teams, defending himself from attacks, and has enough mobility to really make his way around an arena. In my opinion, he's the best stick-and-move Vanguard of the lot. While he doesn't have the same disruptive factor that Venom does, he can quickly dive into the action, distract the enemy's team's attention, and then protect himself long enough for your team to clean up the mess. What makes Captain America so good is the simple variety within his kit. For starters, he can sprint, which makes him faster than most other heroes as a baseline. Add on to this his Liberty Rush ability, which allows him to surge forward, and you have a great combination of speed plus quick engage or disengage. When in the air, Cap can use Super Soldier Slam to smash into the ground at a targeted location. When I talk about disruption, this is what I mean, the ability to dive into an enemy team and force opposing players to pay attention to the tank. Once you're in the action, the key is to stay in the action, because you need to land hits to enable the secondary effect on your left-click attack, Sentinel Strike. See, if you're accurate with Cap, that second hit will enable a shield throw that can ricochet 4 times. That's a huge amount of damage you want to tap into while also passively extending your attack range, but it requires you to be accurate. If an enemy tries to run away or slip out of range, you have your shield throw Vibranium Energy Saw ability, and in combination with Liberty Rush, you can use this to cause a burst of damage and re-engage the enemy player. Again, the key is pressure, and if you can keep that up and you have a competent team that's fighting in the backline, you'll most likely win a team fight. Where Captain America falls short is when enemies manage to elude his melee pressure. While you do have the ability to protect yourself with Living Legend, any competent ranged player will quickly deplete your shield, and then the one thing you have to protect yourself is your mobility. For that reason, you never want to run straight towards enemies in a large area with your shield up. The best thing you can do is navigate around tight corners or attack from above, dropping in on an enemy whenever possible. If they know you're coming, you're much less effective. Plus, you don't want to waste your shield's defenses before ever getting into a fight. When you're actively fighting, that's when you want to use Living Legend to defend yourself as protection against the onslaught of enemy abilities that will no doubt come if you dive into a group. Apart from that, you just need to make sure to keep pressure on the enemies you're attacking, and if you give them space and you don't have any way to re-engage, you'll most likely die, and it's as simple as that. So to play Captain America effectively, you need to keep in mind a few things. First, be aggressive, but don't be dumb. If you run into enemies head first, you're going to get picked off early before you ever get into a fight. Second, use the element of surprise to your advantage. Attacking from above is a game changer, and when you dive into an enemy team, you completely disrupt their flow. Third, use your mobility to your advantage. Gaming 101, the moment you stand still is the moment you die, so be sure to stick and move, causing as much pain as possible while never staying in place for too long. Finally, keep that pressure on, but don't forget to protect yourself with your shield. Use that mid-fight to absorb major enemy attacks and then rush back in to re-engage. Let the enemy exhaust all of their cooldowns because in typical Captain America fashion,
I could do this all day.
Doctor Strange in his current state is powerful in the right hands. He's got limited primary offensive capabilities, a nice defense, and almost no ability to disrupt the enemy team, but one of the strongest ultimates of all the Vanguards. What Strange brings to a team is a huge amount of defensive distraction in the form of his shield. Not only is it big, but it's got a lot of HP, which, when used strategically, can pull the attention of an enemy player away from your teammates and onto you. Think about people's inability to ignore that shiny object, and you'll get why this shield is so eye-catching. What this does is buys your team time, and herein lies the rub with Doctor Strange. If your DPS can't capitalize on your distraction, then your efforts are usually for naught. The kicker is, you do have a way to escape if things get too hot. When your team is being pushed back and your shield is depleted, you can use your cloak to soar upwards, often breaking line of sight of the enemy team. Most times you can float to an elevated spot and escape combat, and that's something most Vanguards can't do, but it's not foolproof. When things go right and you have a competent team around you, Doctor Strange can be wildly effective, especially in melee. Landing shots and expunging the dark magic that you build up as an AoE can wreak havoc on an enemy team, but that largely depends on your supporting cast. That's the main issue with Doctor Strange. He is incredibly team dependent. In pickup groups, this is either going to go one of two ways. You'll have an awesome collection of players that know their roles and can execute without question, or you'll have a bunch of scrubs that just want to wear a leotard and shoot out webs. Because Strange has lower HP than most tanks and doesn't have the ability to quickly dish out damage, you have to take a more measured approach to attacking the enemy team, slowly pushing them back, dealing damage in the process. His only saving grace is that Eye of Agamotto is an incredibly powerful ultimate, one of the strongest Vanguard abilities in the game. But again, it requires your team to make full use of its effect, and if you and your team aren't on the same page, it's a wash. That being said, if you are clicking with your team enough that portal jumps actually work, you probably already understand what makes Doctor Strange good and where he falls short. So to play Doctor Strange effectively, you need to keep in mind a few things. First, your shield is your biggest asset, providing both defenses and, more importantly, distractions. Use it as a tool to change the trajectory of a team fight and prolong the action so your team can clean up the kills. Second, your ultimate can completely freeze enemies in place for multiple seconds if you time it right. Dropping down on an unsuspecting team and using this is a great way to completely disrupt a team fight. Finally, don't be afraid to push up on enemies. You may have less HP, but your shield can be used in bursts to soak major enemy attacks. You do need to be close to enemies to take full advantage of your secondary offensive ability, and if you stay at range, you won't be able to utilize your most disruptive, damaging spell. While I was unsure of Groot at first, I came to love this massive, silent Vanguard. He brings so much to the table in terms of enemy manipulation that his sheer presence can often be a determining factor in a match, but to appreciate that, you first need to understand where he excels. Groot can summon two different types of walls, a larger one called an Ironwood wall, and a smaller one called a Thornlash wall, which he gets 2 charges of. These are your key, plain and simple, to dominating a match because you, more than any other character, can manipulate the flow of the action. Walls can be used in a variety of ways, but the two that I've found to be the most effective are walling off enemies from engaging in combat altogether, forcing them to run around to find another way to join a team fight, and isolating enemies from the rest of their team, giving your team a clear target and an easy hero to pick off, changing the dynamic of a team fight. If you learn to master those two things, your presence on the battlefield can't be ignored, and while you don't have the ability of an on-use shield or any way to restore your health, using your walls to manipulate the flow of the action is huge. What's equally important when playing Groot is your positioning and spacing. You have a medium-ranged attack, which means you don't ever need to be in true melee range of your enemies. Chipping away at their health from a short distance away is going to be far more disruptive because you'll most likely be an undeniable target for an enemy team trying to pick off the healers or DPS, but if you're standing in the way, well, good luck. You also have your secondary attack, Spore Bomb, which is another ranged attack that further adds to the argument that Groot really functions as a frontline tank, but not one that excels in the middle of the action. Groot does have 2 glaring weaknesses, and they're pretty apparent if you've ever skimmed through his abilities and played him. First is his lack of mobility. Groot doesn't have a single ability that allows him to reposition or speed up his movement. This can be a real issue, which is why positioning and spacing is so important. Second is his lack of any defenses. As I mentioned before, Groot doesn't have any on-use shields and no way to actively restore his health, but he can receive bonus health when he's near an Ironwood wall and attacking enemies. It's not much, but with a large 850 health pool already, having a small shield on top of that can be really nice. When you're overextending, that's when you get into trouble as Groot, so recognizing that early is critical. If you manage to wall off a DPS and have to go toe-to-toe in a fight, you might survive, but you're best when enabling your team through careful manipulation of an arena. So to play Groot effectively, you need to keep in mind a few things. First, use your walls often and always to disrupt the flow of an enemy team. Isolate single enemy heroes when possible and completely wall off others to create obstacles they need to maneuver around. Second, don't overextend and use your mid-range attacks to your advantage. Because you have limited defensive capabilities, you need to be careful not to overcommit and dive into melee, which you're not suited for. Finally, remember that your positioning and spacing are the most important element of Groot's gameplay outside of the fighting itself. Use your walls for cover and enable their empowerment effects while also making sure you put yourself in front of your team to soak up any damage that might otherwise hit a healer or ranged DPS. With the power to protect his team and dish out some ranged punishment, Magneto is one of the more predictable Vanguards in Marvel Rivals, but that doesn't make him a pushover. You just need to know how to maximize his kit. What Magneto brings to the table is a pretty different set of abilities, similar to Doctor Strange in some aspects, but entirely unique in others. Forget what you know about Vanguard pressure, because Magneto has practically none of it, and with absolutely no mobility, he's regulated to a different role entirely on a team, the Protector. See, Magneto's kit is all designed around blocking damage, which takes an incredibly experienced hand to do effectively. His metallic curtain blocks all projectiles for a short period of time, while his metal bulwark and iron bulwark turns incoming damage on you or an ally into rings on his back, which power his secondary attack. 3 abilities, 3 ways to completely stop damage, and the key is timing. Because each ability has a limited uptime, you have to know when's the right time to negate the damage, and that's not easy. To master Magneto, you need 2 things: accuracy and patience. Both his primary and secondary attacks are mid-range, slow-moving projectiles, and since they have a travel time, there's a learning curve to dialing in your hits. Magneto does well poking enemies from a distance, taunting them to engage, and when they do, he does have enough tools to protect himself and an ally. But as you'll see, he's also got a lot of weaknesses. Currently, Magneto is one of the worst Vanguards in the game. That's just what it is. He's slow with no mobility, and his lack of dynamic offense can really be a challenge if you're not accurate. A more casual player will absolutely despise his kit because it's entirely based on timing, knowing when to apply which shield, which just isn't that exciting when it comes to gameplay. He's also got a huge weakness: his range. Any player, specifically melee, that manages to get past his relatively weak offense can tear into him because he's got very few tools to deal with their attacks. This does change a bit with Scarlet Witch on your team unlocking his team up, which enhances his ranged attack, but that does require some team coordination. Once the shields are gone, you better hope you can out-DPS whoever is attacking you, which doesn't happen often. You do have a relatively cool ult that can team wipe if you're patient and line things up, but that one moment of joy doesn't take away from a dozen other moments of pain. So to play Magneto effectively, you need to keep in mind a few things. First, his ranged attacks demand accuracy, and if you got that on lock, your experience is going to be much more enjoyable. Second, he's got limited mobility, so your goal should be to keep enemies at a distance at all time. Any enemy hero that gets into melee range is an imminent threat, and you should consider repositioning as soon as possible. Finally, realize that your defensive tools are all about timing. Knowing when to pop a shield on yourself or an ally takes patience, and understand that those defenses are going to be best utilized often during a team fight. A master of point control, Peni Parker is easily one of my favorite tanks to play whenever I'm queuing up solo, thanks to her kit, perfectly tailored for defending in domination or locking down a zone in convergence. What makes her so lethal is a combination of her sustain combined with her offensive utility in the form of spider mines. At the center of her kit is the Bionic Spider Nest, a placeable robot that deploys a branching series of webs and deploys spider mines in the direct vicinity. While standing on those webs, you are damn near unkillable if you place the nest in the right spot, and this is the key to your success. Whenever you place the nest, you should place it out of the direct line of sight of the enemy team, but still somewhere within your active fighting zone, which can be challenging. Your goal is to hide the nest while still taking full advantage of its benefits. Standing on the webs will grant you movement speed and health back over time, which can provide you more than enough sustain to tip the balance of a fight. Add on to that the arachno mines you can throw out, and not only can you lock down a point, but you can also choke off other pathways that enemies will think twice about navigating without taking extra damage. Peni also has a surprising amount of utility in the form of a stun that has a short cooldown and one of the most effective ways to web up faster heroes. And while not as dynamic as Venom or Hulk, she can engage or disengage with her Cyberbond ability, giving her more than enough mobility. While Peni is amazing at point defense, she does have a few shortcomings, the main one being pressure. Her moveset is impressive, but it's tailored to a very specific gameplay scenario. Anytime you're trying to bully an enemy team, Peni's flaws become more apparent. She simply doesn't have enough disruptive abilities to push enemy heroes around, and that can cause problems, especially when attacking in the convoy game mode, where the pressure is invaluable. Peni's only other real shortcoming is that she has no way to do large bursts of damage. Her mines are reactive, which means you have to be proactive in their deployment, which doesn't help you immediately in a fight. Outside of that, your really only saving grace is your spider nest webs. If that gets destroyed, then your only chance is to fight and most likely die or escape, which is possible. Peni is a layered character, and if all those layers break down, she becomes a sitting target. So to play Peni Parker effectively, you need to keep in mind a few things. First and paramount is to deploy your bionic spider nest in a place that's not in the direct line of sight of the enemy team, either around a corner or behind an environmental object. Second is to fight within your web whenever possible, utilizing its movement speed and healing to keep you alive during a team fight. Third is to place your arachno mines in the direct pathway of the enemy team, sealing off alternate routes to the objective so they either take a ton of damage or get funneled into the action a different way. Finally, realize that when your layers of offense and defense have collapsed, you can use Cyberbond to quickly escape so you can recharge and redeploy to a battle. Thor is currently one of the more perplexing Vanguards to talk about. He's got a strange kit that's hard to master, but fun to play if you have a firm understanding of how it works and a solid team around you. Thor is a frontline tank that combines a little bit of melee presence with enough range and mobility to disrupt enemies that try to keep you at a distance. The key to his domination in a fight is Thor Force, which is a special resource that Thor maintains in order to use his abilities. When using Awakening Rune, Thor gains bonus health and his primary attack becomes enhanced, dealing extra damage and extending its range quite a bit. This is your bread and butter, the way you stay in a fight for a prolonged period of time, but you have to know how to manipulate your Thor Force to use this ability as often as possible. That's where Lightning Realm comes into play. This is a small AoE that deals damage to enemies that come into contact with the boundary. The entire key to Thor's success as a Vanguard relies on you using this to deal damage and quickly regenerate Thor Force, because if you do that, you'll be able to awaken your abilities more often, resulting in bonus health and increased damage. Outside of that, you have a Hammer Throw, which is fine for ranged chip damage, and Storm Surge, which gives you some mobility, but don't be fooled by the character you think Thor should be. He's really built to be a true melee Vanguard. The downside to Thor is that his presence isn't exactly imposing if you don't know how to awaken his abilities, but part of Thor's problem lies in his ability to dynamically engage with enemies. Storm Surge is a charge-up movement ability, so inherently it's slow, while also draining Thor Force. If you use that to engage in a fight and you miss with Lightning Realm, then you have to wait till your resource recharges before you can awaken your abilities, and usually that results in you dying. So you see, your only real option is to run into a battle, which is the slowest and most ineffective way to engage with enemy heroes. However, if you manage to slip into the front line without wasting your Thor Force, you can cause some serious carnage. Unlike a Vanguard that specializes in distraction and disruption, Thor can outright just kill you, but the circumstances are very specific, whereas most other Vanguards are effective in a number of scenarios. So to play Thor effectively, you need to keep in mind a few things. First, he is a pure melee Vanguard with limited mobility. Embrace this and focus on getting to the enemy team without spending your Thor Force. Second, realize that Lightning Realm unlocks your true capabilities, and the placement of this within an enemy team is critical to maintaining Thor Force and awakening your abilities. Finally, use your mobility sparingly, as it uses Thor Force and really doesn't provide the type of dynamic movement you think it does. It's good in a pinch to escape an encounter, but more often than not, it's a dud. So there you have it. After dozens of hours on each of the Vanguards, we hope you enjoyed this guide to helping you master their individual kits. As always, if you like this video and you want more Marvel Rivals in your feed, do me a solid, hit that thumbs up. and consider subscribing. My name is Kodiak, and from everyone here at Legacy Gaming, thanks for watching, and play on.